My name is Abigail, and I'm 38. I'm standing in a small Virginia chapel, watching my daughter Clara glide down the aisle, her smile brighter than the stained glass windows. My heart swells, but it's heavy too. My late husband Henry left me $7 million, a secret I've kept from Clara. I thought her wedding day was perfect until 3 days later, her new husband Marcus showed his true colors. Have you ever held a secret to protect someone you love? Tell me where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to share in our story. The reception hall buzzed with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the soft hum of a jazz band. Clara twirled on the dance floor, her white dress catching the light as Marcus spun her, his grin wide and practiced. I sat at a corner table nursing a glass of wine, my chest tight with pride, and something else I couldn't name. Raising Clara alone after Henry's death had been my life's work, and seeing her this happy felt like a victory. But the way Marcus's eyes scanned the room, lingering on wealthy guests, made my stomach twist. I smoothed the napkin in my lap, remembering Henry's will read to me in a sterile lawyer's office 5 years ago. $7 million, a fortune he'd built quietly, never flaunting. He'd made me promise to protect it, to use it wisely. I hadn't told Clara, not wanting her to feel burdened by wealth she didn't earn. Now, watching Marcus whisper to a man in a sharp suit, their heads bent too close, I wondered if my silence was a mistake. Clara broke away from the dance floor, her cheeks flushed, and dropped into the chair beside me. "You okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice bright but searching. I forced a smile. "Just taking it all in, sweetheart. You look like a dream." She beamed, but her eyes flickered to Marcus, who was now laughing loudly with the same stranger. "He's so good with people," she said, almost to herself. I nodded, my throat tight, and changed the subject to her honeymoon plans. Later, as I helped gather Clara's things from the bridal suite, my sister Celeste appeared in the doorway. Her lipstick too red, her dress too tight for a family event. She hadn't been invited, not after years of bitter silence, but she'd shown up anyway, claiming she wanted to celebrate Clara. "Abigail," she said, her voice sharp, "you're sitting on a gold mine and you think nobody notices." I froze, my hands clutching Clara's veil. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I knew. She smirked. "Henry's money. You can't hide it forever. Not from family." I turned away, my pulse racing. Celeste had always been jealous of Henry, of the life we'd built. Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they echoed my own fears. Had I been selfish keeping the inheritance from Clara? Was I wrong to think she was better off not knowing? I shoved the veil into a bag, telling Celeste to leave. She laughed a cold sound and sauntered off, leaving me alone with my doubts. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from Clara. Her voice was different, strained, like she was choosing her words carefully. "Mom, can we talk? It's about Marcus. He thinks I should quit teaching. Says we'll have a better life soon. I don't know, it's weird." I replayed the message, my coffee growing cold. Clara loved her job, her third graders, the way they hugged her at the end of the day. Why would Marcus push her to give that up? I called her back, keeping my tone light. "What's this about quitting?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Marcus had big plans, something about investments that would set them up for life. He's just excited, Mom. He wants us to dream big." I gripped the phone, picturing his slick smile. "That's great, honey," I said, "but don't rush into anything. Teaching's your heart." She laughed, but it was hollow, and when we hung up, I felt a chill. I paced my kitchen, the voicemail looping in my mind. Marcus's pushiness, Celeste's accusations, that stranger at the reception, they were pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. I opened Clara's old bedroom door, needing to feel close to her, and started tidying her desk. Under a stack of old photos, I found a crumpled note in unfamiliar handwriting. Marcus's, I guessed. It read, "Big payout coming. 3 days. Be ready." My breath caught. 3 days from when the wedding was yesterday. Tomorrow was Wednesday. I sank onto Clara's bed, the note trembling in my hand. It could mean anything, a business deal, a gift for Clara. But my gut screamed otherwise. I thought of Henry, his steady voice warning me to trust my instincts. I wanted to call Clara to warn her, but what could I say without sounding paranoid? I folded the note, tucking it into my pocket, and stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding with questions I wasn't ready to answer. I couldn't sleep that night, the note burning a hole in my pocket. By morning, I was at the local diner, picking at a plate of pancakes, trying to make sense of it all. The place was quiet. Just the hum of the coffee machine and a waitress wiping down counters. I pulled out my phone and stared at Clara's number, my thumb hovering over the call button. I wanted to hear her voice to ask about Marcus without sounding like I was meddling. But before I could decide, Sheila slid into the booth across from me. Sheila lived 2 houses down, the kind of neighbor who always knew everyone's business but meant well. Her eyes were wide, her voice low. Abigail. "I saw Marcus last week," she said, leaning in. "At that dive bar on Route 17 with some rough-looking guys. Not the kind you'd expect at a wedding." I set my fork down, my appetite gone. "What were they doing?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Sheila shrugged. "Talking close, passing papers. Looked like business, but not the clean kind." Her words landed like stones. I thought of the note, the stranger at the reception, Clara's uneasy voicemail. I thanked Sheila, promising to keep her posted, and left the diner, my mind racing. The spring air was crisp, but it did nothing to clear the fog in my head. I drove to the park where Clara used to play as a kid, hoping the familiar swings and benches would ground me. Sitting there, I replayed every moment of the wedding, searching for clues I'd missed. Marcus's charm had seemed genuine, but now it felt like a mask. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of it. A text from Clara. "Can you come over tomorrow? Need to talk about something?" My heart sank. Tomorrow was Wednesday, the day after the note's 3 days. I typed back, "Of course, honey. Everything okay?" Her reply was quick, "Yeah. Just want your advice. Love you." I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Clara never asked for advice unless something was wrong. I wanted to drive to her right then, but I forced myself to wait, to trust she'd open up in person. Back home, I rummaged through Henry's old desk, looking for anything that might help. I found a photo of us from Clara's 10th birthday. Her blowing out candles, Henry's arm around me. The memory stung. He'd always known how to steady me, but now I was alone, piecing together a puzzle that scared me more with every piece. I tucked the photo away and pulled out a stack of his old business cards. One caught my eye. Leonard, his lawyer friend. I hadn't spoken to him since the will reading, but his warning about opportunists echoed in my mind. I dialed his number, my hands shaking. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm but cautious. "Abigail, it's been a while." "What's up?" I hesitated, then spilled everything: Marcus's push for Clara to quit the note. Sheila's story. Leonard listened quietly, then said, "Sounds like you need to dig deeper. I can look into Marcus, but be careful. Don't tip him off yet." I thanked him, relief mixing with dread. Someone else saw what I saw, but that made it real. That evening I stood in my backyard, staring at the garden Henry had loved. The roses were blooming, their scent heavy in the dusk. I thought of Clara, her dreams of teaching her trust in Marcus. I'd raised her to see the good in people, but now I wondered if I'd left her too open, too vulnerable. The note felt like a weight in my pocket, a ticking clock I couldn't stop. I went inside, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at Clara's old school photos on the fridge. Tomorrow I'd see her. Tomorrow I'd find out what Marcus was planning. But as the clock ticked past midnight, all I could feel was the growing knot in my chest, telling me I wasn't ready for what was coming. I pulled up to Clara's new apartment, a squat brick building on the edge of town, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The morning sun was harsh, glinting off the windows, and I felt a prickle of unease as I parked. Clara's text from last night had kept me up, her need to talk gnawing at me. I slipped the crumpled note from Marcus's handwriting into my purse, its words, "Big payout," and 3 days looping in my head. Today was Wednesday. Whatever he was planning, I was about to walk into it. Clara opened the door before I could knock, her smile tight, her eyes puffy like she hadn't slept. "Hey, Mom," she said, hugging me quick. "Thanks for coming." The apartment smelled of fresh paint and coffee, but it felt staged, like a model home. Marcus was in the kitchen pouring orange juice, his grin too wide. Abigail. Good to see you, he said, his voice smooth as glass. Can I get you anything? I shook my head, my jaw tight, and sat on the couch beside Clara. She fidgeted with her wedding ring, twisting it like it was too heavy. Marcus joined us, sitting too close to her, his arm draped over her shoulder. I noticed a stack of glossy brochures on the coffee table, all about luxury condos and investment firms. Clara cleared her throat. So Marcus has been talking to this financial guy, she said, her voice hesitant. He says we could have a big windfall soon. Isn't that exciting? My stomach dropped. I glanced at Marcus, his eyes locked on me, daring me to react. That's a big step, I said, keeping my tone even. What kind of windfall? Marcus leaned forward, his smile sharp. Just smart planning, Abigail. Clara deserves the best, don't you think? His words felt like a challenge, and I wanted to call him out to demand what he knew about my money. But Clara was watching, her brow furrowed, and I couldn't risk pushing her away. I nodded, forcing a smile, and asked about the advisor's credentials. Marcus waved a hand, dismissing my question. Top-notch guy, he said. Handles big accounts. You'd approve. I didn't, but I let it go, my mind racing. Clara chimed in, her voice brighter now. He thinks we could retire early, Mom. Travel, maybe start a family. I saw the hope in her eyes, the same look she'd had as a kid dreaming of far-off places. It broke me knowing Marcus was feeding her those dreams for his own gain. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing air. The hallway was narrow, lined with unpacked boxes, and I spotted Marcus's jacket slung over a chair. My pulse quickened. I glanced back, saw them talking in the living room, and slipped my hand into the jacket pocket. My fingers brushed something cold, metallic. I pulled it out and my breath caught. Clara's childhood locket, the one Henry gave her with a tiny photo of us inside. My blood boiled. What was it doing here? Back in the living room, I sat down, the locket hidden in my fist. Marcus was mid-sentence talking about some beachfront property. I interrupted, my voice low. Marcus, why do you have Clara's locket in your jacket? Clara froze, her eyes darting to him. He blinked, then laughed too loud. Oh, that I found it in a drawer. Thought I'd keep it safe till we got a proper display. Clara nodded, but her face clouded like she didn't quite buy it. I wanted to scream, to shake her and tell her he was lying, but I held back. The locket burned in my palm, a piece of Henry stolen by this man. I changed the subject, asking about their dinner plans, but my mind was elsewhere. As we talked, Marcus kept glancing at his phone, his fingers twitching. I noticed a new text pop up, just visible, all set for tonight. My heart thudded. Tonight. The note's timeline was closing in, and I was running out of time to protect Clara. I left Clara's apartment with the locket still clenched in my hand, its weight heavier than it should have been. The drive home blurred past my thoughts, a tangle of anger and fear. Marcus's text. All set for tonight flashed in my mind, each word a warning I couldn't ignore. I pulled into my driveway, the quiet of my street mocking the storm inside me. My phone buzzed as I stepped inside, and I froze when I saw the sender, Celeste. Her message was short, chilling. You should ask Marcus what he's really after. I know more than you think. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Celeste's meddling always came with a price, but this felt different, sharper. I wanted to ignore her, to write it off as another jab from a sister who'd never forgiven me for Henry's love. But her words hooked into my doubts, pulling them tighter. I tossed the phone onto the couch and paced the living room, the locket now on the coffee table, glinting like an accusation. I tried calling Clara, needing to hear her voice to gauge if she sensed the same danger I did. It went to voicemail, her cheerful greeting twisting the knife in my chest. I sank onto the floor, my back against the couch, and thought of the brochures on her table, the way Marcus's arm had claimed her shoulder. He was weaving a future for her, one she believed in, and I was the outsider, the one holding secrets. The guilt hit hard. Had I pushed her into his arms by hiding the truth about Henry's money? The doorbell jolted me upright. Sheila stood on my porch, her face tight with worry. I didn't mean to snoop, she said, stepping inside, but I saw Marcus again at that bar. This time with a guy I know, Frankie, who's bad news. Loans, debts, the works. I gripped the doorframe, my knees weak. What did they talk about? I asked, my voice barely steady. Sheila hesitated. Money. Big money. Frankie was nodding like they had a deal. Her words were a punch confirming what I'd feared. Marcus wasn't just ambitious. He was dangerous. I thanked Sheila, promising to handle it, and closed the door, my heart hammering. I grabbed the locket and opened it. Clara's tiny photo staring back her gap-toothed smile from years ago. Henry had given it to her on her 8th birthday, promising she'd always be his treasure. Now Marcus had touched it, tainted it, and I felt like I'd failed them both. I sat at the kitchen table trying to piece it together. Celeste's text. Sheila's warning, the note in Marcus's handwriting, they all pointed to a plan, one that hinged on tonight. I thought of confronting Marcus myself, of storming back to Clara's and demanding answers. But what if Clara took his side? The thought of her looking at me with distrust, of choosing him over me, was unbearable. I pressed my hands to my face, the locket digging into my palm, and let the anger boil over. My phone lit up again, this time a call from an unknown number. I answered, my voice sharp. Who is this? A man's voice, low and unfamiliar, came through. Abigail. Stay out of Marcus's business. It's better for everyone. The line went dead before I could respond. I dropped the phone, my breath shallow, the room spinning. Someone was watching me, someone who knew my name, my connection to Marcus. The walls of my home, once a sanctuary, felt like they were closing in, and all I could think was that Clara was with him tonight while his plan unfolded around her. I barely slept, the stranger's voice on the phone echoing in my head, a warning that felt like a threat. By the time I reached Clara's apartment for dinner, my nerves were raw, every sound making me flinch. She'd invited me over, her text cheerful but vague, promising a special evening. I clutched my purse, the locket inside, and prayed I was wrong about Marcus. The building's hallway smelled of takeout, and I knocked, my heart pounding like it might break through my chest. Clara opened the door, her smile warm, but strained, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Mom, you made it, she said, pulling me into a hug. The apartment was dimly lit, candles flickering on the dining table, a bottle of wine open. Marcus stood by the table, dressed in a crisp shirt, his eyes glinting as he greeted me. Abigail, welcome, he said, too smooth, like he was performing. I nodded, my mouth dry, and sat down, scanning the room for anything out of place. Dinner was tense, the conversation stilted. Clara talked about her students, her voice bright but forced, while Marcus kept refilling my glass, his smile never reaching his eyes. I picked at the pasta, my appetite gone, when he cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table. Thought we should discuss something important, he said, his tone casual but deliberate. Clara looked confused, her fork pausing mid-air. What's this? She asked, glancing at me. Marcus opened the folder, revealing a stack of papers, the top one titled, Family Agreement. My stomach lurched. It's a plan for our future, he said, looking at Clara, then me. Abigail, you've got resources more than most. We're family now, so let's secure Clara's life. I stared at the document, my hands trembling under the table. He knew about the $7 million. The room felt smaller, the candlelight too harsh. Clara frowned, leaning over to read. Marcus, what's this about? She asked, her voice sharp. He patted her hand like she was a child. Just a way to make sure you're taken care of, sweetheart. $5 million transferred to a joint account managed for investments. It's what your mom would want, right, Abigail? His eyes locked on mine, a challenge, and I felt the air leave my lungs. $5 million. He was bold, brazen, laying it all bare. I pushed the folder back, my voice low. How do you know about my finances, Marcus? He didn't flinch, his smile widening. Let's just say I do my homework. Clara deserves the best, and you've got the means. Clara's eyes darted between us, her confusion growing. Mom, what's he talking about? She asked, her voice small. I wanted to tell her everything, to rip the mask off Marcus, but the words stuck in my throat. She didn't know about the inheritance, and now he was using it against me. Before I could speak, the doorbell rang, sharp and jarring. Clara jumped up, muttering about a delivery, leaving me alone with Marcus. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. Don't make this hard, Abigail. Sign it or Clara might hear things she won't like. My blood ran cold. Was he threatening to turn her against me? I gripped the locket in my purse, my anger surging, but Clara returned, her face pale, and behind her stood Celeste, uninvited, her smirk cutting through the tension like a blade. Celeste sauntered into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood, her eyes glinting with something vicious. "Clara, honey, you look stunning," she said, ignoring the papers on the table. I stood, my fists clenched, the locket still in my purse like a lifeline. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharp. Celeste laughed, a brittle sound, and glanced at Marcus. "Just checking on my niece's new life. Seems I'm right on time." Clara's confusion deepened, her gaze flicking to me, then Marcus. "Aunt Celeste, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus stood, his charm slipping, and gestured for Celeste to sit. "Let's all calm down," he said, but his jaw was tight. Celeste ignored him, pulling a chair close to Clara. "Your mom's been keeping secrets," she said, her tone dripping with venom. "Big ones. About money." Clara's eyes widened, and she turned to me, hurt flashing across her face. "Mom, is this true?" she asked, her voice breaking. I opened my mouth, but Celeste cut me off. $7 million, Clara. From your dad. She's been sitting on it while you scrape by." My heart stopped. The room spun, the candles blurring into streaks of light. Celeste had betrayed me, spilling my truth to hurt me, and Marcus had used her, feeding her just enough to make this moment a weapon. Marcus seized the moment, his voice soft but calculated. "See, Clara, I just want what's best for us. Your mom's been selfish hiding that fortune. Sign the agreement and we'll build the life you deserve." He slid the papers closer to her, his hand brushing hers. Clara stared at the document, then at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, and each word was a knife. I stepped toward her, my voice shaking. "Clara, I was protecting you. This money, it's complicated. It's not what you think." But she pulled back her chair, scraping the floor. "Protecting me or controlling me?" she snapped. Marcus put a hand on her shoulder, and I wanted to scream, to tear him away from her. Celeste leaned back, smirking, her mission accomplished. I realized then she'd told Marcus about the inheritance, not out of concern, but to wound me, to punish me for years of distance. Clara picked up the agreement, her hands trembling, and read the first page. "It's $5 million, Mom," she said, her voice hollow. "For our future. Why can't you just trust me?" I saw the clause buried in the fine print, giving Marcus full control, a legal cage dressed up as love. My throat burned, but before I could speak, Celeste stood, her voice cutting through. "Abigail always thought she was better than us, Clara. Even when we were kids. She's hoarding your dad's money to keep you small." The accusation landed like a slap, and Clara's tears spilled over. She looked at me like I was a stranger, her belief in me crumbling. Marcus watched, his eyes cold, knowing he'd won this round. I stood frozen, the weight of their words crushing me, my silence now a noose. Clara clutched the papers, her sobs filling the room, and I felt my world splinter, every piece of trust I'd built with her shattering in that candlelit trap. I left Clara's apartment in a daze, the sound of her sobs and Celeste's venomous words ringing in my ears. The night air was cool, but it did nothing to soothe the fire in my chest. I drove home, my hands shaking on the wheel, the image of that contract seared into my mind. Marcus had played his hand, and Clara, my Clara, was caught in his web, her trust in me shattered. But as I pulled into my driveway, something shifted. I wasn't going to let him win. Not like this. Inside, I poured a glass of water, my throat raw from holding back screams. The locket sat on the counter, a reminder of what I was fighting for. I picked up my phone and dialed Leonard Henry's old lawyer friend. He answered, his voice steady, grounding. "Abigail, you sound rough." "What happened?" I took a breath and told him about the dinner, the contract, Celeste's betrayal, and Clara's tears. He listened, then said, "That's a legal trap. We can fight it, but we need to be smart." We met the next morning at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind with chipped mugs and sticky tables. Leonard spread the contract across the table, his pen circling clauses like a hunter marking prey. "This gives Marcus control," he said, tapping the page. "It's dressed up as generosity, but it's theft." I nodded, my resolve hardening. How do we stop him without losing Clara? I asked. Leonard leaned back, thoughtful. Show her the truth, but gently. And we need evidence. He suggested hiring an investigator to dig into Marcus's past. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness matching my mood. Clara's face at dinner, so hurt, so lost, flashed in my mind. I'd kept the inheritance secret to shield her, but now it was tearing us apart. I pulled out Henry's journal, a leather-bound book I'd found in his desk last week, and slid it to Leonard. Henry wrote about protecting our family from greed, I said. I want to show this to Clara. Maybe it'll help her see. Leonard nodded, his eyes kind. It's a start. Let's get her away from Marcus first. Back home, I called Clara, my heart pounding as the phone rang. She picked up, her voice quiet. Mom, I don't know what to think anymore, she said. I swallowed hard, keeping my tone soft. Can we meet, just us? I need to explain. She hesitated, then agreed to coffee tomorrow at our old spot by the river. I hung up, relief mixing with dread. I had one chance to reach her, to pull her back from Marcus's lies. I spent the afternoon sorting through Henry's things, looking for anything to strengthen my case. In a box of old letters, I found a note from him, written a year before he died. Abigail, trust your gut. You're stronger than you know. I clutched at, tears stinging my eyes. Henry had always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. I tucked the note in my pocket, a talisman against the fear creeping in. I was done hiding, done letting Marcus twist my silence into a weapon. Tomorrow I'd start fighting for my daughter, and I wouldn't stop until she was safe. The river sparkled under the morning sun, its gentle ripples a stark contrast to the churn inside me. I sat at a weathered picnic table, Henry's journal in my lap, waiting for Clara. The coffee shop nearby buzzed with early risers, but this spot, our spot, felt sacred, where we'd shared ice cream cones and dreams years ago. I traced the journal's cover, its leather worn from Henry's hands, and felt a spark of his strength steady me. Today I'd tell Clara the truth, no matter how it hurt. She arrived, her steps slow, her sweater too big for the warm day. She sat across from me, her eyes guarded, and I saw the weight of Marcus's lies on her. Thanks for meeting me, I said, my voice soft. She nodded, picking at a splinter on the table. Just say it, Mom. What's the truth? I took a breath, the air sharp in my lungs, and opened the journal to a page I'd marked. This is your dad's, I said, sliding it to her. He wrote about protecting us, about how money can twist people. I didn't tell you about the $7 million because I wanted you to build your own life, not be defined by it. Clara's fingers hesitated, then turned the pages, her eyes scanning Henry's slanted script. I watched her, my heart aching, and continued. Marcus knows about the money. That contract isn't for you. It's for him. Her face tightened, but she didn't look up. Why should I believe you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You hid this from me. I leaned forward, my hands steady now. Because I love you, Clara. I've made mistakes, but I've never stopped fighting for you. Read what your dad says about trust. It's all there. She paused, her finger tracing a line, and I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a crack in Marcus's hold. I pulled out my phone and played a voicemail I'd saved from Leonard, his voice calm but firm, outlining Marcus's history of shady deals. Clara listened, her jaw clenching, and when it ended, she set the journal down, her hands trembling. He said he loved me, she murmured, more to herself than me. I reached for her hand, but she pulled back, not ready. I swallowed the sting and nodded. I know, sweetheart, but we'll figure this out together. That afternoon, I met Tabitha, the private investigator Leonard recommended, at a diner across town. She was all business, her notebook filled with scribbles, her coffee black and untouched. Marcus has a record, she said, flipping a page. Embezzlement in Ohio 3 years ago. He's been cozying up to a lawyer named Quentin, who drafts contracts like the one you saw. I nodded, my resolve like steel now. Can you get proof? I asked. Tabitha smirked. Already on it. Give me 2 days. Back home, I sat at my desk, Henry's note from yesterday in front of me. You're stronger than you know. I dialed Celeste, my anger tempered by purpose. When she answered, her voice was wary. What do you want, Abigail? I took a breath, my tone even. You told Marcus about the money. Retract it, or I'll make sure everyone knows your part in this. I recorded the call, a quiet click sealing my leverage. Celeste sputtered, but I hung up my hands steady. I stood and walked to the window, the evening sky bruising purple. Clara's doubt. Tabitha's lead, Celeste's silence. They were steps small but real toward pulling my daughter back. I pressed Henry's note to my chest, its words a pulse against my heart, and closed my eyes. The fight was just beginning, but for the first time in days, I felt the ground beneath me solid mine to hold. The morning after my talk with Clara, the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I stood at the kitchen counter chopping carrots for a stew I didn't plan to eat, the knife's rhythm grounding me. Clara's silence since our Riverside meeting weighed heavy, her doubt still lingering in my mind. I'd given her Henry's journal, played Leonard's voicemail, but her hesitation told me Marcus's grip hadn't loosened. My call to Celeste, the recorded threat, sat like a stone in my chest, its outcome uncertain. Tabitha called before noon, her voice clipped through the phone. "Got something," she said. "Meet me at the library back entrance." I grabbed my coat, the autumn chill biting as I drove across town. The library's back lot was empty save for Tabitha leaning against her car, a manila envelope in hand. She didn't waste time. "Marcus met Quentin last night," she said, handing me the envelope. "Photos, timestamps, and a bank transfer. He's moving money fast." I opened the envelope, my hands steady but cold. Grainy photos showed Marcus and a wiry man, presumably Quentin, at a dimly lit cafe, papers between them. A bank slip listed a transfer of $10,000 to an offshore account, Marcus's name clear as day. My stomach twisted, not from shock, but from the clarity it brought. He wasn't just scheming, he was already acting, pulling Clara deeper into his web. I thanked Tabitha, promising to follow up, and drove to Leonard's office, the envelope burning a hole in my passenger seat. His secretary waved me in, and I spread the evidence across his desk, my voice low. "This is enough, right? To stop him." Leonard studied the photos, his brow furrowed. "It's a start," he said. "Fraud, maybe extortion. We can file a complaint, but we need Clara on board. Without her, it's just paper." His words landed hard. Clara still torn, still half believing Marcus's promises. I knotted my throat tight and left the weight of her trust pressing down. Back home, I found a voicemail from Sheila, her voice urgent. "Abigail, Clara was at the community center asking about you. She seemed upset. Call me." I dialed Sheila, my pulse quickening. She said Clara had been there, clutching a notebook, asking if I'd ever lied about Henry. My heart sank. Marcus was twisting my silence, planting seeds of doubt. I sat on the porch, the evening air thick with the scent of damp leaves, and replayed Sheila's words. Clara's questions, her notebook, her search for truth, it meant she was grappling, but with what I wanted to call her, to drive to her, but Leonard's warning held me back. Push too hard and I'd lose her. I clutched the locket, now back in my pocket, its metal warm from my grip. The fight I'd started was moving, but it felt like I was chasing shadows. Every step forward met with a new wall. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It was a photo, Clara sitting in a park alone, her face drawn. No message, just the image sent to silence me. My breath caught, fear and fury colliding. Someone was watching her, watching us, and the game Marcus was playing was darker than I'd imagined. I stared at the screen, the world narrowing to that single frame, my resolve hardening, but my heart frozen, caught in a moment I couldn't yet break. The photo of Clara in the park stayed with me, a silent threat that followed me into the night. I sat in my living room, the lamp casting long shadows, my phone face down to avoid its glare. I'd texted Clara asking if she was okay, but no reply came. The silence was louder than any argument, a chasm I couldn't cross. I thought of the evidence on Leonard's desk, the bank slip, the photos of Marcus and Quentin. It was real, tangible, but it meant nothing if Clara didn't believe me. I called Celeste again, my voice flat, the recorded call my only leverage. She picked up, her tone defensive. "What now, Abigail?" I didn't pause. "You fed Marcus my secret. Undo it, or I send this recording to the police." She laughed, but it cracked, betraying her fear. I'm broke, she said, her voice dropping. I thought he'd cut me in. I'm sorry. The confession stunned me, not for its honesty, but for how small it made her seem. I hung up my hands cold, her apology hollow. The next morning I found Clara at my doorstep unannounced. Her eyes red-rimmed, a backpack slung over her shoulder. She didn't hug me, just stood there, the notebook from Sheila's story clutched to her chest. I read Dad's journal, she said, her voice brittle. I don't know who to trust anymore. I stepped aside, letting her in my heart a knot of hope and dread. She sat on the couch, flipping through the notebook pages filled with her own handwriting, questions about me, about Henry. I made tea, the clink of the kettle filling the silence. Clara spoke first, her words slow. Marcus says you're keeping the money to control me. But Dad's words, they're different. She looked up, her eyes searching mine, and I saw the girl who'd once believed I could fix anything. I sat beside her, my voice steady. I hid the money to protect you, not to hurt you. Marcus wants it for himself. I've got proof. She nodded, but her gaze drifted like she was caught between two truths. I wanted to shake her to make her see, but I stayed still, letting her process. Then she whispered, I'm filing for an annulment. I don't love him anymore. The words hit like a wave relief crashing against sorrow. I reached for her, but she stood stepping toward the window, her back to me. I need time, Mom, she said, and walked out, leaving the notebook behind. I picked it up, her questions scrawled in frantic ink. Why did Mom lie? Was Dad ashamed? My chest tightened, the weight of her pain heavier than my own. Leonard called later, his voice brisk. We filed charges against Marcus and Quentin. Fraud, extortion, the works. It's moving fast. I thanked him, but the victory felt empty. Clara's departure, her half-broken trust, was the real cost. I sat at the table, the notebook open, her words blurring before me, and felt the fight drain out, leaving only the ache of a mother who'd won the battle but lost her daughter's faith. I woke to the soft creak of the cabin's floorboards, the morning light filtering through pine trees outside. Clara and I had driven up to Henry's old place in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a spur-of-the-moment escape after her annulment papers were filed. The cabin smelled of cedar, and time its walls lined with memories of summers long gone. I stood at the kitchen counter brewing coffee. The gurgle of the pot, a quiet comfort. Clara was still asleep, her door closed, giving me this moment to breathe. The past weeks had been a storm, Marcus's arrest, and Celeste's confession leaving scars I hadn't yet traced. But here in this worn cabin, I felt a stillness I'd forgotten. I stepped onto the porch, the air crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth. The valley stretched below, mist curling over the hills, and I let myself remember Henry not as the man who left me millions, but as the one who'd carved this life for us. I sat on a rocking chair, cradling my mug, and thought of Clara's face yesterday, softer but still guarded. She'd barely spoken on the drive, her hands folded in her lap, but she'd come with me, and that was enough. I'd spent so long fighting for her trust, her safety, that I'd forgotten how to just be her mother. Now, with Marcus gone, I wanted to rebuild not the walls I'd put up, but the bridge between us. The community had rallied in ways I hadn't expected. Sheila had organized a fundraiser at the community center, neighbors pooling money to help Clara start over. I'd gone standing in the back, watching strangers share stories of Henry's quiet kindness, how he'd fixed a neighbor's roof, taught kids to fish. Their words painted a man I'd loved but hadn't fully known, and I felt a pang of gratitude, not for the money, but for the legacy he'd left in people's hearts. Clara's door creaked open and she stepped out, wrapped in one of Henry's old flannel shirts, her hair a mess. She sat beside me, silent, her eyes on the hills. I didn't push, just sipped my coffee, letting the quiet hold us. Finally she spoke, her voice low. I keep thinking about Dad, how he'd sit here whittling. I nodded, picturing Henry's hands steady with a knife shaping wood into small animals for Clara. He loved this place, I said. It was his peace. She turned to me, her eyes searching. Did you ever feel like you failed him? The question caught me sharp but not cruel. I set my mug down, the wood of the chair cool under my palms. Sometimes I said, but he never saw it that way. He saw us as his strength. Clara looked away. her fingers tracing the armrest, and I felt the weight of her question not just about Henry, but about us. I wanted to tell her I'd never stop trying, but the words stayed inside the morning, too fragile for promises. We sat there, the mist lifting the world, waking slow. My heart was still raw, but it was lighter, like the valley clearing below. I glanced at Clara, her profile sharp against the dawn, and saw not just my daughter, but a woman finding her way. The cabin held us, its silence a gift, and for the first time in months, I let myself hope, not for answers, but for time. The afternoon sun dipped low, painting the cabin's walls golden. Clara and I walked down to the creek behind the property, our boots crunching on fallen leaves. The water ran clear, bubbling over smooth stones, and we sat on a flat rock, the kind Henry used to call his thinking spot. I didn't speak, and neither did she, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was like the creek itself, moving steady, carrying things away. I pulled a small wooden box from my pocket, one I'd found in Henry's toolbox that morning. Inside was a letter folded tight, his handwriting faded but unmistakable. I'd read it alone at dawn, my eyes stinging, but now I handed it to Clara. She took it, her fingers careful, like it might break. "It's from your dad," I said. "For you." She unfolded it, her breath catching as she read silently. I looked at the creek, giving her space. The letter was short, written when Clara was 16, urging her to trust her heart to carve her own path. I'd forgotten he'd written it, tucked it away for a day he wouldn't see. Clara folded it back, her eyes wet but calm. "He knew me," she said, her voice soft. Even then, I nodded, my throat tight, and we sat, the water song filling the gaps. Later we cooked dinner, simple spaghetti with sauce from a jar, the kitchen warm with steam. Clara laughed when I spilled garlic powder, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard in months. We ate at the rickety table, swapping stories about Henry, how he'd burned pancakes, how he'd danced badly at her school recitals. Each memory was a stitch pulling us closer, not erasing the hurt, but softening its edges. Sheila's fundraiser had done more than raise money. It had reminded me of the community Henry loved, the one I'd pulled away from after his death. I told Clara about the scholarship I wanted to start in his name, something to help kids like her students. Her eyes lit up and she leaned forward. "Can I help?" she asked. "I want to be part of it." I smiled, my chest warm. "Of course," I said. "It's ours." That evening a letter arrived from Celeste, delivered by a neighbor who'd stopped by. I opened it alone, the cabin quiet, Clara reading by the fire. Celeste's words were halting, raw, admitting her jealousy, her shame. She was in therapy, trying to rebuild. I set the letter down, my anger gone, replaced by something softer, not forgiveness yet, but a door left ajar. I'd invite her to visit someday when the time felt right. Clara came to me later, holding the letter from Henry. "I'm keeping this," she said, tucking it into her pocket. "It's like he's still here." I nodded, my hand brushing hers, and we stood by the window, the stars sharp above the mountains. The world felt wide, not heavy, and I saw Clara's strength, her own now, not mine to carry. I breathed slow, the night wrapping us in its calm, and for a moment everything was enough. The riverbank was still, the water catching the late afternoon light as I stood with Clara, Celeste, and Sheila. We'd come to scatter Henry's ashes, a promise I'd made to him years ago, but hadn't found the strength for until now. The urn was heavy in my hands, its metal cool, and I felt Clara's presence beside me, steady, her breath soft. Celeste stood a step back, her eyes down, and Sheila, ever the anchor, gave me a quiet nod. This was our closure, not perfect, but ours. I opened the urn, the ashes fine and gray, and let them drift into the current. They swirled, then vanished, carried downstream where Henry used to fish. Clara slipped her hand into mine, her fingers warm, and we watched in silence, the river taking a piece of him, of us. I thought of the years since his death, the weight of his money, the secrets I'd kept. Today that weight felt lighter, like the water itself was washing it clean. Back at the house, we sat around my dining table, the one Henry had built, its edges worn from years of meals. Sheila brought pie, her laughter filling the room as she recounted town gossip. Celeste was quieter, her hands folded, but she smiled when Clara teased her about her old perm. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was a start, a thread we might weave into something stronger. I watched them, my heart full, and realized how much I'd missed this, the simple act of being together. The scholarship in Henry's name launched that week, a small ceremony at the community center. I stood at the podium, Clara beside me, and spoke about Henry's belief in giving back. The room was packed, neighbors and strangers alike, their applause warm. A girl named Lila, barely 16, approached, after her eyes bright. "I want to volunteer," she said. "Help kids like me." I nodded, seeing Clara in her, and felt Henry's legacy take root not in dollars, but in hope. Clara moved back to town, renting a small place near her school. She'd enrolled in a master's program, her evenings filled with books and lesson plans. I visited her one night, bringing takeout, and we sat on her tiny balcony, the air thick with summer. She talked about her students, her dreams, and I listened not as the mother who'd fought for her, but as one learning to let her shine. She wore the locket again, its chain glinting, a quiet reclaiming of her past. I started walking in the mornings, a new habit down streets I'd known my whole life. The town felt different now, not smaller, but clearer, each face a story Henry had touched. I'd pass the bakery, the park, the river, and think of Clara's hand in mine, of Celeste's letter, of Lila's eager voice. The pain of Marcus's betrayal, of Clara's doubt, hadn't vanished, but it was softer, like a bruise fading under skin. I'd come through not whole, but stronger, and as I paused by the river, watching it flow, I felt ready to carry what came next. Each evening now, I sit on my front steps, the sky bruising into dusk, and watch the neighborhood settle. Kids bike past, their laughter sharp, and I think of the years I spent guarding Clara, shielding her from truths I thought too heavy. The money, Marcus, Celeste's betrayal, they'd torn us apart, but they also brought us here, to this quiet place where love feels enough. I've learned to cook again, simple things like roasted vegetables, the act of slicing and stirring, a kind of prayer. It's small, but it's mine, a rhythm I'd lost. Clara's grown into someone new, her voice steadier when she talks about her future. She's teaching again her classroom, a world she builds with care. We don't talk about Marcus, but his shadow lingers, a reminder of how close we came to losing each other. Celeste visits sometimes, her steps cautious, her story softer. I listen not because I owe her, but because I choose to, because holding on to anger feels like carrying a stone I don't need. Lila, the girl from the scholarship event, stops by weekly, her backpack stuffed with ideas for the program. She talks fast, her hands waving, and I see a spark Henry would have loved. The scholarship's grown, funding 3 students this year, and each one feels like a piece of him alive in the world. I keep a photo of him on my mantle now, not hidden in a drawer, his smile a quiet anchor. I don't need to protect his memory anymore. I share it. The lesson I carry isn't loud or grand. It's this: love is richer than any fortune, but it's fragile, built on trust you can't force. I hid the money to keep Clara safe, but safety isn't control, it's letting go, letting her fall and being there when she rises. I've learned to trust myself too, to listen to the voice that guided me through the dark. We all have that voice, faint but true, and it's enough to carry us home. What's a truth you've learned that set you free? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for being here, for walking this path with me. Here's to healing, to finding light in the quiet moments. Be well.